like to introduce you all to our second career readiness and management webinar. We created this webinar series to help walk you through all of the steps of finding, applying, interviewing, and obtaining a new job. This second webinar in the series is going to be walking you through everything you need to know about both resumes and cover letters. And we aim to have you walking away from here with all the understanding needed to fresh up your materials and apply to your jobs with your best foot forward. We'll have some more information about the other sessions in this series as well and what you can come to expect from those soon. But without any further ado, I wanted to welcome our presenters. Today, I'm excited to be joined by my colleagues, Dr. Amy Dietzman, Sarah Snyder, and Jenna Gillio, as they dive into how to freshen up your resume and stand out from the competition. So I'll let them take it away and I'll pass it over to Jenna.
Thanks, Jess, for the introduction. Here, we're going to go over a quick overview of the series so far and what's to come. So last month, we kind of laid the foundation by exploring career mapping and beginning your job search. So be sure to check that out on YouTube if you missed it. Today, we are going to be dissecting the resume writing process and providing pointers on nailing that step of the job hunt. In our next session, we're going to be tackling how you can increase your chances of getting the interview by customizing your resume to the job description and ensuring your resume is approved by the applicant tracking system. And in our final session, we'll go over interview basics and tips for success throughout the interview process and beyond. So we hope you'll join us for the rest of the series. And again, we'll provide the specific dates for these sessions at the end of today's webinar. We are going to kick off today's webinar by discussing the different types of resumes and how to decide which is right for you. We'll also outline what should be included in a resume and how to style one. Later, we'll explore cover letters, including the purpose of a cover letter and what to include or exclude. And if you missed our last webinar, we are taking a bit of a different approach in this series. So Sarah and Amy are posing as job seekers throughout the series, and I am acting as their advisor and career coach as they navigate their job search. So they are going to reintroduce themselves here in just a moment. An outstanding resume is not what's going to get you a job. Employers don't hire resumes alone, but your resume is a very powerful tool because it can enhance or impede your ability to land an interview, and that's what's going to score you a position. So think of your resume as a written elevator pitch. It's an opportunity to make a great first impression, impress a hiring manager, and pique the company's interest. Employers may receive hundreds of resumes for a single position, and they typically interview fewer than 10 applicants. And of course, they can only hire one person. A well-written resume is what's going to take you from the applicant pool and into the interview. Before you can even begin writing your resume, you first need to consider what kind of resume you're writing. Ask yourself, what are your professional goals? Are you looking to advance within your organization? Or are you making a career transition? Maybe you're stepping out into the workforce for the first time. Your career goals should directly inform what's included within your resume and how it's structured. The most common type of resume, and generally the most preferred by employers, is a chronological resume. A chronological resume lists your work history and accomplishments in reverse chronological order, from most recent to least recent. And this type of resume, your skills and other qualifications are typically listed toward the bottom of the page. A functional resume, on the other hand, focuses on your skills rather than your work history. The goal of this type of resume is to prove to employers that you're capable of carrying out the duties required by a specific role. According to Indeed, functional resumes are less concerned with where you came from and more so with where you're going. Functional resumes begin with an overview of your professional skills and qualifications. This typically involves a bulleted list under each entry that explains how you've leveraged a particular skill successfully in the workplace. Many functional resumes also include a work history section, but it's typically brief and listed after your skills. So, to kind of sum it up, chronological resumes focused on past experience, while functional resumes focus on future potential. So, which type of resume is best for you? Well, in most cases, employers prefer traditional chronological resumes. This type of resume shows growth and tells employers the story of where you started and how you got to where you are today. So, if you have ample work experience, and especially if you've been with a particular company for an extended period of time, a chronological resume is the sensible choice. However, if you have any gaps in your work history, if you're early on in your career, or if you're making a significant career change, a chronological resume may not be the right fit. Rather than focusing on your work history, functional resumes instead place emphasis on your potential to succeed in a particular role. The evidence of your value is not rooted in your practical experience, but rather on the skill set you could bring to the job. So, in other words, if your skills speak louder than your work experience, a functional resume might be the way to go. So, Amy, let's start with you. Before we talk about your resume, why don't you remind everyone what you're looking for and what you've been doing?
All right. Hi. I am just about to graduate from college with a bachelor's degree in hospitality management. I've been working as a hostess in a restaurant all through school, and I really haven't had any other jobs. I'm looking for a job in hospitality or a job with a heavy focus on customer service. And I was recently looking on Indeed for a job, and then I found this one that was for an event planner, and that really interested me.
Awesome. So, based on what I just shared about the different types of resumes, what are you thinking? What type of resume do you think would work best for you?
Well, since I don't have a lot of experience and I'm just graduating, I think I might use a functional resume so I can show off my skills and maybe the fact that I'm bilingual and not highlight quite so much that I've only just had one job.
Yeah, sounds like you have the right idea. I definitely agree that a functional resume is going to be most applicable to where you are in your career journey. You want to emphasize what you're capable of rather than what you've already done. So before we talk about your resume, Sarah, go ahead and remind everyone where you've been in your career and where you're hoping to go.
Of course. Thanks, Jenna. I'm currently working as a data entry clerk in a marketing firm. I've been here a few years, and this company isn't particularly interested in promoting from within. So I'm looking for new positions where I'd be able to employ my marketing background, but maybe move into something that uses my creativity a little more than data entry does. I'm in a little different place in my career than Amy since I've had a bit of experience in the workplace and I have some at least adjacently relevant work history to highlight. So I think my search would be best served by a classic chronological resume.
Yeah, that's exactly the right thought process. When you want to highlight where you've been, a chronological resume can help clarify your journey so far. Now, every job seeker is different and every resume is unique, but there are some general rules that can be applied to all types of resumes, regardless of the job that you're looking for. Beneath your resume header, you'll want to include your contact information. You should include a single phone number and a professional email address. If you have a LinkedIn profile and it's up to date, I'd recommend including it in this section as well. Below your information block, you generally want to have a resume title. Now, while this isn't required, it has become somewhat of a standard practice. Your title can be your current position, a generic industry-related category, or it can even be the title of the position for which you're applying. Typically, you'll follow your title with a summary describing yourself and some of your basic skills and qualifications. If you are including a summary, aim to be concise, a few sentences rather than a full paragraph. Where you list your education may depend on how recently you graduated. So if you graduated within the last 5 years, your schooling is likely a prominent piece of your resume, so it's okay to place your education section either before or in line with your work experience. If you've been in the workforce for more than 5 years, interviewers are probably more interested in your professional experience rather than in your academic career. So it's okay to move your education section directly after your work history in that case. Your work history, again, should be in reverse chronological order, with your current position at the top of your work experience, and then you can work backwards from your most recent to your least recent experience. As far as relevant skills, any certification is a good certification, even if it's not necessarily related or relevant. Examples of certifications include things like first aid, HTML, or instructional design. Certifications demonstrate expertise, commitment, and proficiency. They show that you have the potential to achieve the same level of dedication in relevant areas. However, you do want to be careful not to highlight more unrelated skills than related skills in your resume. You want to highlight your related skills and achievements first, and then you can include any unrelated skills at the bottom if you still have space. The length of your resume is very important. The most common length for a resume is 1 full page. Now, there are exceptions to this rule, but there are very few cases when a resume should be any longer than 2 pages. You want to keep your resume header looking clean and professional. A simple block at the top with your name, your city, and your state. Use bullet points to ensure your resume is clean, concise, and easy to read. You also want to strike the right balance of text and white space and avoid a resume that looks too crowded. Employers are typically making a quick few-second scan just to check for the necessary credentials and qualifications. So if your resume looks more like an essay than a resume, it's unlikely to be read. Now, the caveat to this rule is that you also don't want it to seem like you're stretching to fill the page either. So avoid using larger fonts or double spacing just to fill the space. Employers are generally aware of these hacks, so instead aim to keep your font and spacing consistent throughout. While there are fields where a graphic resume design would be appropriate, as a general rule of thumb, you should avoid using elaborate designs or templates and instead opt for a plain, standard resume template. This goes for including a photo of yourself as well. Keep it clean and professional and allow the content of your resume to speak for itself. In addition to your styled resume, it's also a good idea to have a plain text resume prepared. A plain text resume is a resume written in plain text file formatting. In other words, it contains no visual design elements, no graphics, italic or bold font, or even any bullet points. So when might you use this type of resume? Well, in some instances, an organization may request a plain text resume on their application, either in place of or in addition to your standard resume. Plain text resumes are also easy to forward and send via email. And we'll talk about this more in our webinar next month, but plain text resumes are also easily scannable by the applicant tracking system. Your resume should be updated constantly, even if you're not currently job seeking. A running resume is a comprehensive document that includes all previous experience, including employment history, extracurricular activities, any volunteer experience, research, and more. It's not intended to be shared directly with employers, so it doesn't need to be formatted like a resume. It can be as short or as long as needed. A running resume includes basic information about each position, so the job title, the location, etc., and bullet points to summarize your responsibilities in that role. It might also include other sections, things like software you're familiar with, or any major projects that you've completed. Having a running resume on hand makes it easy to tailor future resumes to specific jobs. Depending on the position you're applying for, you may want to emphasize different aspects of your work history and experiences. With a running resume, you already have information and bullet points for each position laid out and easily accessible, so you can simply copy and paste any relevant experience into your resume for that particular role. We'll talk more about running resumes and what they should look like and what to include in our next session. So back to you, Amy. Have you found a template that you think would work for you so far?
Yes, I found this one. Do you think this will work for me?
Yeah, I think this looks like a good option. You can kind of highlight that you're bilingual at the bottom, and then there's plenty of space for you to categorize the skills you'll be bringing to a position that you want in hospitality. How about you, Sarah? Have you found a template?
Yes, I found this one and I like it because it's chronological, first of all, which we thought would work well for me. It's also very simple. I like that it's easy to read, it's easy to zone in on the important pieces of information. I think it's a good template for emphasizing my work history in the industry, and I really like the idea of putting a relevant job title in my header so it's clear that this is how I see myself and what I'm looking for.
Excellent. I agree. I think this one is going to meet your needs really well. So before we begin filling in your resumes, let's talk a little bit about using resume language first. Your entire resume should be written in resume language. This means that you won't use any pronouns at all. Instead, using active strategic language is what's going to set you apart from other applicants. Resume language should be succinct, so you want to avoid using any unnecessary words. The more filler words or embellishments you use, the longer it will take your employer to scan your resume and find the information they're looking for. Avoid using the word I or speaking in first person. You also don't want to use your name anywhere except for the information block at the top of your resume. You want to begin each of your bullet points with a verb. When listing your previous job experience, all your verbs should be in the past tense, and for your current role, you'll use present tense to describe current duties and responsibilities, and of course, past tense to describe previous projects or achievements. Using powerful verbs to describe your professional experience and achievements will give your credentials the weight they need to make a lasting impression. Did you hold weekly status meetings, or did you spearhead them? Did you lead a project, or did you orchestrate it? You want to convey to employers that you didn't just do stuff, but you actually achieved great things. You didn't just meet expectations, you exceeded them. The goal is to elicit a wow response that sets your resume apart and demonstrates that, given the opportunity, you'll continue to exceed and excel for your next employer. If you need help finding power verbs, there are tons of great grammar help sites out there, or you can even pull out a thesaurus if you've got one. So Amy and Sarah, I tasked both of you with preparing some bullet points to kind of summarize your experience at your current positions. So Amy, can you share with us what you've written so far?
Okay, so I wrote these, but I can tell based on what you just said that they need some work. So I'm hoping you can help me. I wrote greet guests, communicate nightly specials, clean the front lobby of restaurant, and then organize the seating schedule according to wait staff workload.
Okay, this is a great start. So let's talk through how you can incorporate some of those power verbs we just discussed. You'll want to write your bullets in such a way that your next employer will see them as transferable experience for a different type of position in hospitality. So rather than just greet guests, how about something more like cultivate positive guest relations by providing prompt and friendly customer service?
Oh, okay, I see. So when you write it like that, I'm talking more about customer service rather than being too specific about just greeting guests.
Exactly. Let's try another one. Communicate nightly specials. How could you make that more broad for another position where you might utilize a specific skill?
Okay, what if I changed it to be more about my communication skills, like demonstrate excellent communication skills when informing customers of nightly specials?
Awesome. You could even add interpersonal skills in there as well, like this. Demonstrate excellent communication and interpersonal skills when informing customers of nightly specials. Let's move on to the one about cleaning the front lobby. How about you take a stab at rewriting it?
Okay, what if I said something like maintain a clean and organized work area to ensure customer satisfaction?
Awesome. Now you've got the hang of it. So let's work on the last one. You wrote, organize the seating schedule according to waitstaff workload. Maybe a good way to rewrite this one is to kind of highlight your accuracy and attention to detail. You could try something like this. Monitor table turnover to evaluate server workloads and calculate accurate wait times.
Oh, that is so much better. Thank you so much. I like that.
You're welcome. Let's take a look at what Sarah has.
So here are some of the things I do that I think demonstrate my strengths. I process invoices, I track trade show expenses, and I track credit card charges. Obviously, these are not very specific or active, so I need some help.
That's okay. This is a good starting point again. So let's dig into the details of some of these tasks and see if we can help strengthen them for your resume. Let's start with this first one, process invoices. Kind of flesh it out a little bit more. Think about who is responsible for this process, what kind of invoices you're processing, maybe any additional steps that could be a part of that task, and the ultimate outcome of performing it.
Okay, well, I'm primarily responsible, though an additional step is getting approval of each invoice from management. Thinking about the ultimate reason for processing them, I'm thinking it's like to make sure that everyone is accountable for what's getting spent and who is getting paid.
So if you're responsible, we can use language like spearhead. Now, beyond accountability is also financial integrity. So what if we tried something like spearhead seamless processing of vendor invoices and obtain management approval, ensuring financial integrity and accountability?
Wow, that really dressed it up a lot. I think that's perfect. I see how it's a lot stronger and more specific. I like how it focuses on outcomes too, not just my daily to-do list.
Right. So let's tackle the second one, track trade show expenses. Think about how you knew what the expenses were, how you tracked them, and why it was important that it be done.
Okay, for this one, I had to work with the trade show coordinator to figure out the expenses. I had to keep a log of all of them. And I think, kind of obviously, the biggest reason for doing that was to make sure that we stayed in budget for each trade show that we participated in.
Okay, so these are great additional details. So why don't you take a stab at rewording this one?
Hmm. Okay, coordinate closely with trade show coordinator to capture and log all show related purchases, facilitating compliance with budgetary guidelines.
I think that works great. You've added specificity about collaborating with someone else, and you provided a great reason that also shows you can maintain a focus on budget concerns. How about the last one? Track credit card charges. How do you think we can kind of enhance this one without being redundant to the last bullet point?
This is another process I'm responsible for, so I think I could use a stronger action verb to start it than just I track it. I also need to add a reason, what benefit is provided by my performing this task. So maybe something like manage tracking and entry of all credit card expenses, delivering transparency and accountability in financial reporting.
That's great. I think what's important here is that we strengthen without getting too hung up on wordsmithing. You've done a great job of that. You've ensured each bullet starts with a power verb. You provided specificity about the tasks and any involved parties, and you've given context for each to show why it's important. Really nice work. Do you feel like you can complete this same process with the other positions in your work history and maybe possibly even other elements of your current position so that you can add those to your running resume?
I really do. Thank you so much for helping me figure out like what to think about when rewriting these. That was great.
Awesome. So now that you've got the hang of using resume language, I want to share a few additional tips to keep in mind as you continue building your resume. First, nothing will undermine your chances of employment faster than a poorly written resume. In fact, over 40% of resumes will be tossed for conventional errors. So you want to ensure that yours is free of any spelling and grammar mistakes. There's no reason to include implied tasks on a resume. An implied task is a task that's inherently part of the position. Things that are common knowledge that you do every day. So for example, if your position involves maintaining records, you don't have to mention that you do filing every day. It's generally understood that if you're maintaining and managing records, you're also filing them. It's an unfortunate truth that one very prevalent type of bias in today's workforce is ageism. Ageism can be found at all stages of employment, from the vetting of a resume to the laying off of personnel. But there are some things that you can do to help neutralize that bias. Your email address and provider can reveal a lot about you. An older email provider, like AOL or Hotmail, can show your age or indicate that you might be a little bit slow to catch up on technology. Gmail and Outlook are both safe bets. Also, be careful of including any numbers in your email address. Employers may assume your birth year. In fact, remove any date that might reveal your age, including dates of certifications, education, or graduation. You also want to avoid including any employment history older than about 10 to 15 years. Be mindful of your resume file name. When you upload your resume as an attachment, the file name might be visible to the employer. So if your document is titled Resume Draft Number 123, or if it includes the name of the job that you're applying for, these aren't things that you necessarily want to divulge to the employer. So instead, it should simply include some variation of your first and last name and the word resume. Writing a cover letter is no walk in the park. It can be tedious, but if there is an option to include one, the numbers show it's worth your time. According to LinkedIn, 49% of hiring managers admit that a strong cover letter has convinced them to interview a candidate who has submitted a relatively weak resume. Think of it like this. If a resume is required and a cover letter is optional, as is usually the case, by electing to attach both, your first impression with the employer is that you're the type of person that goes above and beyond the basic requirement. The purpose of a cover letter is to enhance the content of your resume and ensure you land the interview. It gives you the opportunity to address anything in your resume that you might be concerned about. Things like employment gaps, shorter-term positions, and most importantly, a career transition. This is where you can show the employer how prepared and enthusiastic you are to be entering into a new and exciting field. Cover letters can also be particularly useful for recent graduate resumes, as they provide the opportunity to remind the employer that whatever you lack in work experience related to the position, you'll make up for with your invaluable skills, passion, and dedication. Your cover letter should be even more targeted than your resume. It's where you want to share any pivotal information about yourself that will demonstrate to the employer that you're worth interviewing. Consider including any soft skills or strong character traits that you feel the employer should know about you. Think any experiences that aren't necessarily quantifiable data, but that you're proud of. The content of your cover letter should be entirely professional unless there's something personal that directly relates to the position. However, personal information like marital status, family, religious affiliation, etc., should not be included. If you include volunteer experience, consider any possible implications it may convey to employers. So, for example, if you volunteered at a youth church camp, you'll want to determine whether you're comfortable disclosing that information to a potential employer. The same is true for using company-specific language. It shows you're not just desperately looking for any job, but that you're actively interested in working for them specifically. Employers feel a sense of pride in their company, and they're looking for employees who do too. You want to end your cover letter by letting the hiring manager know you're looking forward to an interview where you can better present all of your skills and answer any questions that they may still have. Remind them that you're excited about the opportunity and are eager to become part of their organization. Like the resume, you want your cover letter to be succinct yet powerful. The cover letter is your opportunity to step outside the confines of the structure of your resume, though you should aim for your resume and cover letter to look like a cohesive set using the same font and styling. You want to use standard margins on your cover letter, and it should be confined to a single page. 3 paragraphs is the most ideal length. It is acceptable to include bullet points in your cover letter if you have a specific list of skills or qualifications that you want to highlight, but no more than 3 to 5. So now that we've discussed best practices for resumes and cover letters, I want to briefly touch on another written component of the job seeking process, and that's thank you notes. Thank you notes are typically sent via email following the interview, and they serve a few purposes. First, to communicate to the employer that you're still interested in the position. They can also demonstrate that you're a good listener and have retained the details and information that you gathered during the interview. And most importantly, they help ensure you remain on an employer's radar amongst a sea of applicants. Much like resumes and cover letters, thank you notes should be professional, carefully crafted, and intentional. If writing isn't your strength, make sure you double and triple check your work, or better yet, have someone you trust review it before sending it. While thank you notes aren't going to make up for a lack of experience to land you the job, a poorly written one may be the reason an employer decides to go in a different direction. We'll continue to delve deeper into what you should include in a thank you note, as well as further examine the pros and cons in a future session when we discuss the interview process. Now, we've covered a lot of ground in our session today. So what questions do you have for me, Amy and Sarah?
Well, my question is, you mentioned earlier that implied tasks shouldn't be listed on a resume, but what if I have an entry-level job and really everything I do is basically implied?
Yeah, that's a great question. So earlier, you and I rewrote some of your bullets to be a little bit more skills-based and less implied. So for example, if you work as a hostess and you literally take people to their table, try thinking about what skills you might be employing in that task. Are you using customer service, communication, interpersonal, or organizational skills to seat people at tables? Then write your tasks more broadly so that you can show employers that what you did as a hostess can transfer to another position. How about you, Sarah?
You mentioned being careful about what volunteer experience you list on your resume because it could tell a prospective employer more than you want it to. Well, a big part of my life is volunteering in the PTA at my kids' school, and some of the things I've done for them are really relevant to the type of position I'd be seeking. Should I include that kind of volunteer work?
This is a great question. With any volunteer experience, you must be mindful of the implicit message that you're sending by including it. So, for example, in the case of including PTA volunteer experience, you're implying that you have children. If you're comfortable disclosing that to a potential employer, then it's totally fine to include it. You just want to make sure that you think through what any volunteer position you list is telling a potential employer about you. Back to
Okay,
Amy.
I have another question. I'm wondering how to address a cover letter. I never know if I'm supposed to write like to whom it may concern or dear sir or madam or what.
This is where a little bit of research will come in handy. Addressing the hiring manager by name demonstrates that you've done your research and invested in this specific organization. So using to whom it may concern or hiring manager does work, but addressing the person directly shows this particular job is very important to you, and you're not just sending the same generic letter to multiple employers. And many job postings, the hiring manager's title is listed, or the posting will list the title of the person who you would report to. These are great clues to use for a search on LinkedIn. For example, if the job posting says that the position will report to the director of process improvement, you can search that on LinkedIn and then address your letter directly to that person. If you can't find those specifics, you can also address it to the HR person who posted the position. And this is also found in job postings on LinkedIn. Other ways that you can find people is to check the About Us page on the organization's website and see if the person you're looking for has a bio listed there. And in the cases where you can't find any names at all, you can simply address your letter to the hiring committee instead.
My job search is not super targeted right now on a particular type of position, so I'm open to even making a lateral move if it'll put me into a company that's more receptive to the idea of promoting within. As such, my job search is really broad right now. I might apply to a position for data entry and I might apply to a position for a design assistant, for example. When I'm applying for these positions, what should I be customizing and how do I figure out that?
Yeah, so it's pretty common to be in a place where you're applying broadly across different types of positions within an industry. It's also pretty common to see resumes and cover letters that were clearly written one time and then submitted identically across the board. Now, while it does take more time, it's in your best interest to customize both your cover letter and your resume to each job opening that you're applying for. This shows dedication and intentionality in your job search, both of which will be more attractive to a prospective employer than a summary statement that has nothing to do with the position that they're hiring for. So in our webinar next month, we're going to dive more deeply into what needs to be customized and how, as we focus on making that connection between applying and actually getting the interview. So we hope you'll all come back to join us as Amy and Sarah learn how to target their cover letters and resumes for specific job postings. And that webinar is taking place next month, May 14th at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. And then the last webinar of the series on June 18th, we'll be getting into interview techniques and more about thank you notes. Thank you all for joining. I'm going to pass it back over to Jess to open it up for questions.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. So much great information in there. We do have a couple of questions. First, from Joshua, asks, how important do you see adding specific stats into this section? And that question came in while you were talking about using resume language when you were kind of revising Amy and Sarah's resume bullet points. So the question was, how important do you see adding specific stats into those resume bullet points?
I can take that one. I think that anytime you can quantify your accomplishments, it's good to do so. If you improved efficiency by 28%, tell us that. It's much more impactful than saying I improved efficiency and leaving it open-ended. If you increased sales by $4 million, tell us that, because again, it's more impactful than just I increased sales. So one of the things to think through as you're looking at your bullets is, what can I quantify and how can I quantify it so that it really zones in on my abilities?
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah. Another question was, do I have to have a summary on my resume?
Oh, that's another good question. I don't think that a summary is mandatory by any stretch, but I do think that there is value in it. A summary is kind of what you could kind of think of it as the bridge between your cover letter and your resume, where it's a very succinct description of who you are, what you're looking for, that might be brief compared to your cover letter and more, I don't know, verbally than your resume bullet points are, where it's just a little bit meatier than that.
Great.
And I'll also point out that Sarah and I have hired a lot of people together, and when we get a whole lot of resumes and we're just going through them as fast as we can and just trying to pick out important things and see what we don't like or who doesn't have what experience, sometimes those summaries at the top are a really good way to catch our attention and sort of help us like focus in on that person and what that person wants to do for us. And when people customize that section for us, like it says, I want to work for Tutor.com or something like that in that section, that is a really good way to grab our attention. So I think if you can really craft that really well at the top, that's really important. If you're not comfortable and you don't know what to say, then maybe don't do it. But I think it's a good way to get the attention of a hiring manager.
Agreed.
Great. More here. Is it true that employers use AI or computers to scan our resumes for keywords? If so, How do I get more of those keywords into my resume?
And that's a great question also. You guys are full of great questions. I think that not every company uses AI or computers to scan resumes. However, a lot of them do, so it's better to be prepared for that. In our webinar in May, we're really going to target applicant tracking systems, which are those computer programs that you might send a resume through to see how well does this match the job description that I posted, so that you can narrow down which resumes to look for. And we're going to talk about how to get those keywords from that job description into your resume in a way that will make it both appealing to the applicant tracking system and then also appealing to the human eyes that are going to see it after it comes through the applicant tracking system. So tune in May and we'll answer that more thoroughly.
Great, thank you, Sarah. One more, and I did just see a hand get raised. So you can, if you have a question, you can put that into the question and answer, or if you have a comment, you can put that in there as well. But we have another question here regarding ageism. That person says, I think it's a great idea to not include dates on a resume, but it's certain that my age will be discovered when filling out the online application that requires I input dates. So will omitting dates on a resume really help?
That's a good question. I can take that one. What I generally do when I am hiring someone is I go through the resume first. Then I look to see if there's any other attachments. If I'm really interested in that person, I'll see, did they include a cover letter? And then I'll go into the application and just double check that the person didn't ask for, like, you know, $1 million a year, or just a couple of other questions that might be in there. And rarely do I really pay attention to the age at that point. I just, like, not even on my radar at all. So I would say that yes, it's very possible, especially if you include your LinkedIn profile and they go on your LinkedIn and they can see when you graduated from college and when you've been only working since 2020, then we're more than likely going to say, okay, this person's pretty young. I mean, that happens. But if you can try to remove the ageism to just get through those first couple of things I said I do when I look at resumes, I look at the resume first, then I go and look at the cover letter. You could have totally impressed me with those two things before I even click on your LinkedIn or look at your application. And you may have already gotten through the door and I didn't even think about how old you were. So, I mean, as much as I'm not looking for age, I don't care about age. It does come up. You do see it. So maybe best just to keep it off.
Awesome. Thanks, Amy. We had another one just come in. This person wants to know, how many jobs is too many jobs on your resume? And how do you know which jobs not to put on your resume, not to tell people about, especially if you have been working for decades?
That's a good question too. You don't want to go back more than 15 years, and that's even a lot. Sometimes some people even say 10 years. So in the last 10 years, if you still have a ton of jobs, then I would only include, I would include all of them for the 10 years, unless you did something like for a really short time, you worked at like Bath and Body Works. You don't want to include that, that's fine. But most of the time when you have your jobs listed, you can choose how many bullet points you put under each one. So only include like some real good details on the ones that are relevant to the position you're applying for. If you had a few jobs where you're like, I want them to see that I was always working, that I didn't, take a break for 5 years. I want them to know that I was working, but what I did there isn't that important to this position, then just include 1 or 2 bullet points under those. That way you save your space for the ones that are more relevant. And then again, if you've been working for decades, unfortunately, what you did 20 years ago is probably not relevant at all to anything you're going to do now. I know that sounds ridiculous, but more than likely they don't care about that. So you don't want to go back that far. I know it's hard to do. I've had the same problem. Like, I want people to know that, like, I did this really cool thing when I was 25, but it doesn't really matter right now. And Sarah, do you have any other thoughts on that one?
I think one of the things that you said about going back more than 10 years is absolutely true, that as much as you want to tell them about what you used to do long time ago, what is the likelihood in reality that the skills that you learned then are actually going to apply? It's pretty low. But I think if there is something really big you want to highlight, you could use an other accomplishments sort of section where you're not putting dates on it, but you're listing out some other cool projects that you worked on or things that you managed to do that could be like, I don't know, a miscellaneous, I wouldn't call it miscellaneous, but a miscellaneous section that's not specifically tied to jobs that you've had in the last 10 years, but that is truly relevant and impressive. But I would also say that it's highly unlikely that something like that really exists if the last 10 years have led you to where you are. If that makes sense.
That's a good point, Sarah. I like that.
All right, Ruby's full of questions. We had one more come in.
Awesome.
Is it a detriment if you've worked at only one job for more than 10 years?
Hmm.
Ooh.
I think it depends a little bit on whether or not your job title has changed. I've been at Tutor.com for 17 years. I don't think that it's a detriment to my resume. Not that I'm looking for somewhere else to go, but I've also had quite a few job titles in that time, so I can list those out and show the progression of my career, even though it's all within one company. I think if you've only had one job title for 10 years, I would find a way to emphasize that the things that you've been doing have built upon each other and that what you are doing now is maybe more comprehensive or more in depth than what you used to do. So maybe I'm not sure exactly what that would look like without knowing more about what those 10 years looked like at that job for you. But I think there's ways to emphasize that this is a good thing and make it look good. Additionally, you can speak up more about that in a cover letter about why you've been there for only 10 years. Or
Yes,
sorry, why you've been
definitely.
at only one place for 10 years. That's what I meant.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, I would write about that in your cover letter. You could also write a really nice summary at the top to catch their attention. I mean, it does show that you have loyalty and longevity and you're committed to a job. Those are all good things. But Sarah's right. If you've just had the same title for those 10 years, you're really going to need to try to find other ways to catch their attention, or otherwise they will look at it and say, 10 years doing one thing. Maybe this person,
Doesn't
isn't
have
super
ambition.
ambitious. Yeah.
Right.
All right, thank you. And would you say that strongly matching your resume to keywords in the job description, despite your college major not matching the major requirements directly, would that still help in getting the job you're applying for?
Yes, I think so. I think there's a lot of jobs out there now that just want you to have a college degree. They don't really care what it's in. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. If you have, like our character who has a degree in hospitality management, she wanted to go and do something totally different. That's okay. There's applicable skills. Remember, you always want to look for the skills that you can apply to what you're doing. But if you actually pull things from the job description that will get you through the ATS system that we're going to talk about next time, that could actually be better. So I do think it's important to try and match that resume to the job. Sarah, did you have any other thoughts about that?
Yeah, I would also say don't let the education requirement of a job description deter you from applying if you think that you are
Yes.
qualified and you are highly interested, whether that be the level of education or the area or the field of education. If they say a bachelor's degree in XYZ and you have a bachelor's degree in ABC, but you're really passionate about this thing, go for it. Or if they say you need a master's and you only have a bachelor's, go for it. Like Amy said, a lot of places just want to see that you can devote yourself to education long enough to get a degree. And even though they've put a specific field in the job description, they're not necessarily married to that in who they find to fill the position. If you can sell yourself aside from that, go for it.
And that's true for anything on a job posting. I've heard that you really only need to have 60% of what is posted. I've heard 40% too, what is posted. I mean, they're looking for the ideal, most perfect candidate that they could ever find walking the earth. There aren't that many people who have all of those things. So it's totally okay if you only have some of them. Still go for it, because there might just be something on that resume that just resonates with them and they say, yeah, we got to talk to this person, and then you wow them. So don't let those job postings deter you from going for it.
And one of the
And
things that Amy and I often look for when we're hiring people here is someone who can grow. So if you
Yep.
already tick all of the boxes, literally all the boxes, you might not be the candidate we're really looking for. But we're looking for someone who ticks a lot of them and has opportunity to grow here.
True.
awesome. And I'll just add, personally, I have a degree in chemistry and I've never worked in a job where I used my chemistry degree. So yeah, it's definitely like Sarah and Amy said, it's more about the skills that you've learned and the experiences that you have and how you sell yourself on your
That's
resume.
right. That's right.
All right, looks like this is the last question. If you don't finish college, should you still put that on your resume?
That one's tricky. That's tricky. I don't know if Sarah and I agree on this. I think there is a possibility it will bring up more questions if someone sees the resume and sees that you put like the name of the college, but you don't have a degree listed underneath it, or, you know, something like that. It may bring up more questions and it may not be good. But at the same time, any bit, like we said, any certification is a good certification. It's the same with any education that you have is good education. It doesn't matter if you went for 4 years or 3 years or 2 years, you still took classes, you still, showed a dedication to learning, and there's still something valuable to that. So I would say yes, I guess, unless you only went for like a semester. I don't know. What do you think, Sarah?
I was thinking that two things that I would consider. One is, what was the fields that you studied? If you got beyond just kind of general prerequisite courses, where did you emphasize your study and is that relevant? Then you might be more inclined, if it is, to
Mhm.
list it and to talk about, maybe give a little summary of what you learned while you were there instead of listing a degree. But also,
That's
how
a good
long
idea.
ago was it? If it was a long time ago and you have work history that can more than make up for it in your own opinion, then maybe you don't put it on there. So I don't know. I'd say it's a case by case thing, but
Yeah,
yeah,
agreed.
it's a little tricky.
But don't put your high school, whatever you do. And we've seen people who put their
Don't
high
put a
school or
place.
even their middle school. Don't do that.
No.
All right. Well, it looks like that was all the questions that we had.
That was awesome.
So thank you so
Yeah.
much to our presenters, Jenna and Amy and Sarah. And again, this session was recorded, and you'll receive that recording in the next couple of days. And all previous recordings are up on YouTube. If you're interested in the future sessions but can't make them, still register so you can receive the recording, or you can find it later on YouTube. But thank you all so much. Thank you for your great questions, and have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thank you.